I run a demolition outfit based out of Fort Ridge. 3 trucks, 5 men, and a schedule so tight it squeaks. I've made a living taking jobs other crews turn down, usually because there's a mess of red tape, mold, or 30 years of asbestos behind every wall. It doesn't matter to me. You pay me, I'll knock it down fast. That's what made the asylum job so tempting. Ridgeway State Hospital had been sitting on the outskirts of town since the 1930s. It shut down in '87, and no one has touched it since. Local kids dared each other to sneak in, but most folks just steered clear. The town finally got a grant to tear it down and turn the land into a civic park or a water treatment facility, depending on which council member you asked. I didn't care. The contract was city approved, and a $30,000 bonus was offered if we finished before the deadline. 30 grand for a month's work was enough to keep my crew paid through winter. I'd already started cutting corners to make sure we beat the clock. During our pre-demolition walkthrough, I had the blueprints rolled under one arm and a flashlight in the other. Harris, the city rep, walked ahead of me, discussing asbestos maps and load-bearing walls. Most of the hospital was your standard early century build, red brick with steel girders and slate floors. You could practically smell the electroshock therapy in the walls. We reached the sub-basement through a narrow stairwell behind the boiler room. That's when I noticed something off. At the far end of the corridor, where the blueprint showed an old storage annex, there was a wall, not an original wall. This one was newer, with bricks set unevenly and mortar that was sloppy. Someone had sealed the hallway by hand. Blueprint says this leads to Archive B, I told Harris, tapping the page. Looks like it was part of the original design. He didn't even slow down. Yeah, that area got sealed back in the early 2000s. No entry records, no inspection forms. City says we're not touching it. Why? I asked. If it's part of the structure, we're supposed to clear it. He shook his head. That's the issue. It's not listed on the active plans. Legally, it's unacknowledged. If we file to unseal it, that opens a chain of delays. Environmental inspections, historical society review, maybe even a zoning appeal. I frowned. How long are we talking? 4 to 6 weeks minimum. Whole project freezes until it's cleared. Your bonus goes up in smoke. We stood there for a moment, both of us looking at the bricked wall. The mortar looked old but brittle. Someone had done it quickly. No signage, no permit tags. Just a narrow hallway someone wanted gone. Mark it inaccessible and move on, Harris said, scribbling something on his clipboard. The city is covering its ass. So should you. I nodded and we kept walking. But I didn't stop thinking about that wall. If my crew found it while gutting the substructure, they'd start asking questions. That meant someone would call it in and the whole damn timeline could collapse. I wasn't about to lose my payday over one sealed room that some bureaucrat had forgotten to add to the plans. I figured I'd handle it quietly the night after the crew clocked out. If there was something worth seeing behind that wall, I'd see it myself. No reports, no delays. And if it turned out to be nothing, even better. We started demolition from the top down. Roof sheeting, tiles, plasterboard, and load-bearing elements. Anything that wasn't stone got stripped and dumped within the first few days. The upper floors were gutted clean. My crew worked fast. We always did. But something about Ridgeway State Hospital slowed them, piece by piece. At first it was small things. Tools left in one room ended up in another. Power flickered even with our generators running steadily. One of the guys swore his ladder had shifted on its own while he was on it. I chalked it up to nerves and caffeine. Rushing a job meant taking less precaution and paying less attention. The trick is to have just enough to not have accidents. Then came the sounds. Footsteps banging. Always in the halls we'd already cleared. Hollow echoes that didn't match our movements. One afternoon, Carl radioed me from the east wing, saying he heard someone whispering through a vent. Swore he could hear his name. I checked it out. The vent was clogged with 30 years of dust and bird droppings. Whatever he'd heard, it wasn't a voice, but the real shift came with Manny. He was one of my best guys, ex-military, didn't scare easily, but that morning I found him standing in the sub-basement, staring at the bricked-up corridor. He wasn't supposed to be there. I called his name twice before he turned to face me. His face was pale, eyes glassy, as if he'd just come out of a fever dream. "I'm done," he said. "You can mail my check." I frowned. "What happened?" He silently stepped past me, grabbed his things, and walked straight off sight. Before he left, he said one thing. "It doesn't want to go." I didn't ask what it was. I should have. But we were already behind schedule, and I couldn't afford to lose another day. I covered Manny's hours myself, hoping he'd come to his senses and return to work. I hauled trash, logged loads, and didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night. And still, the sealed corridor sat there in my head, like a rotten tooth. I started dreaming about it. Always the same thing. One long room, rows of chairs facing at a whitewashed wall. No windows, no doors. Just me standing at the back watching them. An empty chair, but it wasn't really empty. I could feel something waiting on it, just behind the veil. 3 days later, a new city rep showed up. A young guy, sharp haircut, shoes too clean for the sight. "How's progress?" he asked, flipping through my reports. "Smooth," I lied. "Right on target." He nodded, made a few notes, and didn't ask about the bricked corridor. Probably didn't even know it was there. I kept it that way. The crew clocked out around 6 p.m. I stayed behind, made up a story about reviewing reports. The truth was, I didn't want anyone around when I opened the corridor. Too many eyes meant too many questions, and I already had a good rhythm with the city rep. If I could just clear the space and log it, I could list it as it was in the blueprints. Box checked. No delays. I wheeled the concrete saw down into the sub-basement, every step echoing off the stone walls. The temperature dropped the deeper I went. Humidity hung in the air, thick and musty. The corridor stood waiting at the end of the service hallway, its cinder block seal untouched since the day I first noticed it. I marked the wall with chalk, fitted my respirator, and started cutting. It took longer than I expected. The mortar was thick and industrial grade, sloppily applied, but heavy set, like whoever sealed the space hadn't wanted it reopened, but $30,000 was waiting on the other side of a completed demo, and this wall and what lay beyond stood in the way. The blocks gave way in chunks. Dust billowed out in hot, chemical-tasting bursts. I smashed through the final layer with a sledgehammer, grunting as stone clattered across the floor. My flashlight pierced the darkness beyond the hallway. It was pristine. No water damage, no graffiti. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic. The linoleum tiles were uncracked. The paint a faded institutional green. My boots left prints in the dustless floor, which made no sense. Everything else in this place had been eaten by time. At the end of the hall stood a single padded cell. The door creaked open under my hand, revealing a narrow space, soft-walled, lined with yellowed cushions. An old hospital cart sat in the center, fitted with leather restraints. The mattress was thin, sunken in the middle. A cracked mirror was mounted crookedly above a bolted desk. I caught my reflection in the shattered glass, my face broken into jagged angles. On the floor, beneath the cot, a circle had been carved into the tiles. The cuts were deep and deliberate, each line edged with something sharp. Nails, maybe. The etching was unfamiliar, but felt wrong, off balance, like it pulled at something in the back of my mind I didn't know I had. When I walked around, I could feel myself lean toward it, like it had its own gravity, a vertigo feeling that always gravitated toward the strange markings. A rusted metal chair stood beside the bed. A patient logbook rested on the seat, its leather cover warped with age. I opened it with cautious fingers. The entries were brief and clinical, typed on a mechanical typewriter. Most were mundane. Dietary notes, behavior logs, sedation levels. but the last page stopped me cold. It was handwritten. Do not remove her. Do not observe her. Do not allow her name to be spoken aloud. I flipped back. Earlier entries had referred to her only as the subject, but in the margins of the logbook's back cover, scratched deep into the leather, was a name, and then I saw it again and again and again. On the padded wall beside the cot, on the mattress straps etched into the foam in ragged fingernail grooves, the same name over and over. I didn't speak it, but I read it, and in that moment, the temperature in the room dropped so sharply I could see my breath. The cart creaked behind me. I wasn't alone anymore. I backed out of the cell without turning around. I didn't breathe until I was back in the corridor. Then again, when I made it up the basement stairs, I shut off the lights, locked the exterior doors behind me, and didn't stop moving until I was behind the wheel of my truck. My hands trembled on the drive home. I told myself I'd leave it alone for now, figure out another way to finish the job. The job had to stay on track. That was all that mattered. Before first light, I came back to the site and sealed the entrance. I dragged old plywood sheets from a scrap pile, bolted them over the fresh gap I'd cut the night before, screwed them tight into the concrete frame, then tagged the boards with paint marker. Asbestos, do not remove. Later that morning, I told the crew I'd found some outdated insulation that needed reporting before we continued demolition on that section. City doesn't want the paperwork, I said, shaking my head. They're telling us to wall it off and move on, so we're moving on. Nobody questioned it. Most of them didn't know about the odd situation anyway, so they believed whatever I told them. But the next day, everything went wrong. One of the excavators clipped a gas line that shouldn't have been there. Then the backhoe, idle seconds before, lurched sideways and crushed one of the old support beams. Nobody was hurt, but it set us back by 2 days. The welder, Nate, caught a flashback from his own torch. Equipment failure, 2nd or 3rd degree burns. He didn't say a word on the way to the ambulance, just stared at me, lips trembling. Manny didn't come back either. I kept my mouth shut, told the others it was old wiring, rusted valves, and bad luck. Every job this size had hiccups. I just needed them to keep working. That night, I reviewed the security from the demo yard. One of the perimeter sensors had malfunctioned during the equipment failures. I scrubbed through the logs. Around 2:07 a.m., the infrared sensor picked up movement, something moving the length of the fence, slow, steady, never stopping. It passed beneath the floodlights. No body heat signature. No footprints left in the gravel. I didn't sleep that night. At home, I heard the name. The one scratched into the mattress, the walls, the log cover, whispered through heating vents. The voice wasn't mine, wasn't male, wasn't human. The 5th accident ended it. Reggie, one of the oldest on the crew, dropped a steel support bracket from a 2nd-story scaffold, said his hands seized up mid-swing. When I held him down, I saw the swelling already forming around his wrist, bones out of place. He was shaking. It wasn't me, he muttered. Something grabbed me. I swear to God, that was the last straw. They packed up and left before lunch. I didn't try to stop them. By that point, the job was nearly done. The southern wing was already leveled. The rest of the upper floors had been gutted and stripped to code. We just needed to bring down the basement shell and clear the debris. 2 days of work, maybe 3. That was all that stood between me and the bonus. The inspection was scheduled for Monday morning. I could already feel the city rep's smug tone when he told me the penalty for delays. I wasn't going to let that happen. The truth was simple. I needed the payout. My own truck was 3 months behind on payments. My wife had taken our daughter to assist her sisters after the last layoff. If this job fell through, I didn't have a next one lined up. So I came back that night with gloves, floodlights, and a crowbar. I just wanted to finish what I'd started. The plywood barrier was still in place over the sealed corridor. I pried off the boards one by one and stacked them neatly against the wall, telling myself it was just another hallway. I kept my eyes down, focused on the floor. and walked slowly down the slope into the untouched wing. The air shifted as soon as I crossed the threshold. Heavy, no dust, still smelled of antiseptic and something sweeter underneath, like spoiled fruit. The crying started while I was checking the junction pipes near the boiler panel. It was faint at first, so soft I thought it might be water in the walls. But then I heard the breath between sobs, a wet, rasping inhale, a woman's voice, broken and rhythmic, repeating something I couldn't quite understand. A lullaby with no tune. I followed it. Each door I passed was open just a crack. I kept glancing in, expecting to find someone inside, but every room was empty. Old beds, restraints on the wall hooks, and cabinets bolted shut. Then I reached the padded room. The crying stopped. I froze in the center of the corridor, surrounded by doors that had quietly clicked shut behind me. The padded room was just ahead. I tilted toward it, careful not to make a sound. It looked the same as before, empty, caught untouched, restraints neatly folded, no visible change. But something in the air had thickened. It pressed against my skin in a way that made my pulse skip a beat. I stepped inside. The mirror was cracked again, a fresh line through the glass, spider webbing out from the center. Beneath it, the old circle scratched into the floor seemed more faded than I recalled, like someone had been working at it. But there was no one here, no body, no footprints in the dustless room, no source of the crying. Still, I could feel her. Not see, not hear, but feel. The room wasn't empty anymore. Something stood just beyond my focus, behind the veil of what my eyes could comprehend. I backed out of the doorway, one step at a time. Didn't turn around, didn't speak. The crying didn't return, but the silence was worse. I scoped out what needed to be done for demolition, but as I left, the hallway was different, longer, narrower. The angles had warped somehow. Every step felt wrong, like the building had shifted when no one was looking. I found the room again, but the door wasn't the same anymore. Wider, open, just a crack, waiting for me. The card was empty, restraints gone. The circle in the floor had been scraped almost completely away. I could hear her now, not beside me, but inside the space, breathing in rhythm with mine, close enough that the air stirred when I moved. It hit me suddenly and stupidly. Her name, it had been carved everywhere for a reason, not to draw her out, to bury her. I remembered old stories, demon names, binding rites, exorcisms. Speak the name and the thing loses its power. I stood at the edge of the circle and whispered it. Once, then again. The silence pulled back from the corners of the room, and she answered. Not in words, not even sound, but in pressure, in presence. Something stepped into the room that hadn't fully existed before. The cot groaned under unseen weight. The restraints snapped tight without hands. The mirror uncracked itself with a low pop, and for a split second, my reflection wasn't alone. A second face stood behind mine, pale, incomplete. I stumbled back, gasping. The silence didn't return, not fully. The room didn't breathe the same way it had before. A slow pressure thickened in my ears, then in my chest until I couldn't tell if I was inhaling or if something was pushing against my lungs from the inside. A faint creak echoed behind me. I turned, hard hammering, but the doorway was empty, still cracked open, still letting in the same cold hallway air. But something was in the room now, not invisible, not visible either, just present, as though I'd stepped onto a stage where someone else had been waiting for the cue, and now I'd spoken it. The cot pulled tight against its bolts. The mattress sank in the middle, pinched down by nothing I could see. In the mirror I saw the shape again, clearer this time, not fully formed, but tall, hollow-eyed, and standing so close behind me, I could feel the heat on the back of my neck. My own face was still, but hers were moving, lips forming syllables I couldn't hear, mouthing the same name I just said. I backed out slowly, holding my breath. The air around the circle felt different now, less like a warning, more like a crack in concrete that had just spread wide open. I thought I'd been clever. I thought knowing her name gave me power. But as I stepped out into the hallway, and the door clicked softly shut behind me, I realized it had never been about power. It was about permission. I woke on a stretcher, strapped in, sunlight bleeding through the clouds overhead. The sky was too bright. Voices moved around me in snippets, dulled and distant, warped as if underwater. Must have missed his last checkout scan. Dehydrated, maybe concussed. An EMT leaned closer and said, "You're lucky someone noticed. If you'd stayed in there much longer." I blinked, my throat dry. I asked how long I'd been inside. She frowned. 3 days. That didn't make sense. I told her it had only been an hour, maybe 2. She looked at the other medic and didn't answer. Later in the ambulance, someone explained they found the sub-basement corridor sealed shut. The supports must have shifted behind me. No one had even known. I was there until the city reps saw the side empty and checked the logs, and saw I hadn't checked out. We tried to jackhammer through the wall. The whole damn passage had folded in on itself. Freak structural failure. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy. They kept me overnight for observation. No injuries aside from a shallow scrape on my wrist. I didn't remember getting it. The next morning I was released. I turned my phone on in the parking lot. 27 missed calls. A new voicemail was left from the city. Rep saying not to worry about the bonus, that they'd extend the project deadline, that I should take some time off and a new crew would finish the remaining tear down at their expense as compensation. I went home and slept for nearly 2 days. Dreamless, empty sleep. Then I got the update email. Cleanup successful. Site declared a safe. No structural hazards or environmental concerns. Photos of the cleared corridor and cell were attached. I clicked through the images. The hallway was pictured there, long and cracked, with the ceiling slouching from age. The padded cell hadn't changed. Caught in the corner. Cracked mirror restraints, still bolted to the frame, leather dried and curling. At the edges, no name marked on any of the objects anymore. The circle of markings was almost entirely erased from the floor. No one had tried to make sense of it, and yet nothing happened. The demolition crews had gone in, walked through that space, demolished it, and moved on. They saw old damage, remnants of a decaying building, and treated it that way. Just another strange wing in a place full of bad history. The job was on schedule. According to the update, they'd hit the new deadline. No delays, no reports of equipment failure or personnel incidents. Nothing like what happened to me and my crew. The email ended by telling me the bonus was mine and I should expect it within the coming days. I actually laughed. A short, breathless sound I hadn't felt in weeks. It hadn't been real. It couldn't have been. Stress, maybe. Sleep deprivation. The pressure of the deadline, and too much time in a building full of ghosts that weren't mine. They went inside. Nothing happened. And I was home. Safe. Paid. Job finished. That should have been the end of it. But that night, sitting at my kitchen table, I opened the photos again. Scrolled through slowly, stopped on one. The cell shot from the hallway. I zoomed in on the mirror. I expected to see something. My brain on overload and I was paranoid. Nothing was there. Tension was building. I felt like I was in the hallway again. The pressure of the room weighing on me as I tried to solve something I didn't know needed solving. I flicked through the pictures, zooming in and scanning pixel by pixel for a clue, a hint toward an answer. Yet nothing I saw could explain why I could feel it again. The presence returning. I lifted my head, ready to feel like I'm lifting my head out of a barrel of water. Yet the relief never came. And finally, I realized why I could feel like everything was off. My room was darker than I remembered. Colder. Chills trickled through me in a stream. No one else was in the room. Nothing moved. But the silence had changed. Thick now, a waiting kind of quiet. I closed the laptop, stared at the wall for a long time. Maybe the new crew didn't find her because she wasn't there. Maybe she came with me.